Hello, and thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name is Shawana Tucker Sims, and as Eastern Area Director of the Links Incorporated, it is my pleasure to welcome you to 2020 election, What's at Stake for Black Women. Almost 1 year ago, here in the Eastern Area, we started this series of Green Table Talks to provide a forum for having frank conversation with experts and advocates about topics that make a difference to the quality of life in our community. Our premise for tonight's conversation is to invite each of us to examine individually and collectively what's at stake for us in the upcoming U.S. national election. I don't think it is an overstatement to say that this discussion is one of the most important conversations that we have hosted to date. Almost 74 years ago, the Links were born out of a willingness of several friends to enter into necessary conversations and take actions to advocate for a better life for those of African descent in a segregated America. Today, our organization stands over 16,000 strong on our legacy of using our voices, our influence, and our resources to help our communities shape a better today and a brighter tomorrow. We have all heard it said about the upcoming election in the United States to vote as if your life depends on it, because it does. And not just our lives, but the lives of our children, our families, our elders, our communities, and of this generation and generations to come. The devastation of the twin pandemics of COVID-19 and systemic racism only serve to highlight and exacerbate the underlying inequities in access to healthcare, employment, nutritious food, education, and economic opportunities, to name a few. The outcome of this election will touch all of those areas and more. We, as Black women, have been the faith keepers, culture shapers, and waymakers from the beginning. We've kept families and communities together while working multiple jobs to care for the lives and families of others. We've gotten more education and achieved more than anyone would imagine, despite being paid less, working harder, and having more obstacles thrown in our paths. We are heading households, caring for children and elders, and leading the fight for equity and justice. When we are impacted, it is a ripple effect throughout our families and our communities. Historically, we have shown up during electoral season to volunteer for candidates, educate friends and neighbors, and vote in large numbers. Our percentage of voting went down in 2016 compared to 2012, and we cannot afford to have that happen again. We also cannot afford, however, not to make sure that those who do get elected show up for us and the interest of our families and communities as well. There's a lot to talk about and a lot to do. We're excited to have two dynamic women to lead this conversation this evening in Dr. Johnetta B. Cole and Glenda Carr. We are honored to have them join us. To all my Link sisters, thanks for the work you have already done and the work I know that you will do between now and the election. Kudos to the Legislative Affairs chairs, Evelyn Sample Oates and Nicole Venable, and their committee for organizing this event. We hope you will leave informed, energized, and ready to act as if everything that matters to you is at stake in this election, because it is. Thank you, and I'll now hand it off to our co-chair, Link Evelyn Sample Oates.
Thank you, Madam Eastern Area Director, and good evening, all of my Link sisters. I am excited to bring you this evening, and I'm going to get right to it and introduce our panelists. We have, again, as our Eastern Area Director said, some dynamic panelists, and I'm going to start with Glenda Carr. As President and CEO and co-founder of Higher Heights for America, Glenda C. Carr is at the center of the national movement to grow Black women's political power from the voting booth to elected office. In 2011, Carr and Kimberly Peeler Allen co-founded Higher Heights to address the dearth of organizing resources for politically active Black women and the lack of support for those who were considering seeking elected office. Through her leadership, the organization has developed several innovative programs and efforts that have quickly solidified its reputation as the political home and the go-to resource for progressive Black women. Carr is the co-creator of hashtag Black Women Lead, a powerful coalition movement that is creating an environment for Black women to run, win, and lead. And the Higher Heights powered hashtag Black Women Vote, a nonpartisan voter activism campaign that serves as an independent and trusted voice for Black women's political concerns. Her work to date has helped to elect 11 Black women to the U.S. Congress, including one to the Senate, and increase the number of Black women holding statewide executive office, including helping to elect the first Black woman to serve as New York State Attorney General. Let's welcome Glenda Carr. And our next panelist, a college president, museum director, author, professor, and civic leader. Dr. Jonetta Cole served as the first Black woman president of Spelman College in Atlanta, Georgia. She was named president in 1987. During her tenure as president, she led a campaign that raised over $113 million, which attracted higher student enrollment and improved Spelman's overall ranking. In 1992, Cole served on President Bill Clinton's transition team as cluster coordinator for education, labor, and the arts. After leaving Spelman in 1997, Cole joined Emory University as a presidential distinguished professor of anthropology, women's studies, and African American studies. From 2002 to 2007, she served as the president of Bennett College. There, she led a $50 million campaign, raised funds for an on-campus art museum, and initiated the Women's Studies and Global Studies program. In 2009, she was named director of the Smithsonian National Museum of African Art in Washington, D.C. Today, she is currently the chair and the president of the National Council of Negro Women. And of course, she's a member of the Links Incorporated. Welcome, Dr. Cole. You will also hear my co-chair, who will start our questions off after our video, is Nicole Venable. And Nicole is recognized by The Hill as one of the top lobbyists of 2018. She has policy expertise on issues ranging from tax reform and trade to healthcare, energy, labor, and telecommunications. My co-chair and her wonderful expertise will be the co-moderator for tonight, and we'll start our questions off, so you'll hear from her. But first, we are going to see a video on Higher Heights, and we ask that if you have any questions, please don't put them in the chat. Instead, put them in the question and answer bar right at the bottom of your screen, and we will do our best to get to your question before tonight's wonderful panel ends. So now you will hear from Nicole Venable.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for welcoming us into your homes. We're so pleased that you could join us today. And I want to thank our two panelists for agreeing to join with us today. Again, I'm very excited because we sort of have a good conversation between sort of old school, new school, bringing perspectives about how you attack these issues on behalf of Black women to the table. I want to start by setting the table a little bit with why we're talking about Black women and why they're so important in this election. For me, as a Politico, every year we sort of look for what's that key demographic of voter that we're looking for. In years past, it's been a soccer mom, it's been rural farmers, it's been that independent voter. But this year is the year of woman. In particular, it's the year of Black women. And for very good reason. As Link Shawana said, our lives depend on it. But we have so much political power that we have to really figure out how to harness it and use it for ourselves and our families and our communities. But just some of the data I'd like to share with you very quickly before we get to our first question from Higher Heights, because one of the things that they do, and it's very important to ground all of our discussions, is in collecting data, and it's so focused and it's about all of us. Black women make up 7.6% of the population. 16 million Black women are eligible to vote, and 67% of us are registered to vote. Still not enough, though. Black women made up 17% of voters who cast ballots in 2017, which it resulted in flipping a Senate seat in Alabama and in bringing the largest number of women to Capitol Hill, over 100, for the first time. Black women at a level of 96% voted for Barack Obama in 2008 and 2012, providing the margin he needed for 2 presidential terms. And with all of those 100 women that came into this particular Congress, it's the most women ever, and it has the largest and most diverse class of African American women. 22 members in the House, 1 in the Senate, 2 Black females are chairs of major committees, and 1 is the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus. So we have a lot of power to wield when we wield it. Finally, I would point out that this year, Black women helped change the course of the primary season by flexing their vote in South Carolina. And as a result, and of the work of both Dr. Cole and Glenda, we now for the first time have a vice presidential candidate on a major party ticket that is also a Black female. And she happens to be affiliated with the Links Incorporated, of which we are all very, very proud. So with that, I'd like to sort of set the table and ask our panelists the first question. You know, and Black women, as Black women, we're sort of frontline. We're frontline as teachers and nurses and doctors and primary caregivers and business owners. And our challenges are really America's challenges. What happens to us are really the things that America needs to fix for itself, for it to be successful in this world and for us to build and grow our economy. So to Dr. Cole and to Glenda, I'd like to ask you, what do you think are the top 2 pressing issues for Black women?
I would love to start by acknowledging the enormous gratitude that I feel just to be here. You know, somebody once said to feel gratitude and not to express it, it's like wrapping a gift and you put a great big red bow on it, but you never give it. So I've learned that I will always express gratitude. First of all, it's really quite a joy and a privilege to be a co-panelist with Sister President Glenda Carr. I admire the work that you do, but I'm one of millions, especially of Black women, who count on the work that you do. And then to my Link sisters, what can I say? Link sisters all, we really do have something going on. Friendship, service. But this year, we've got to put our service into action as if, thank you, our sister Shawana, as if our lives really depend on it. I'm going to actually only quickly address one as a key factor and then turn it to Sister President Glenda. I'm going to choose our health. You know, because if we don't have our health, then we can't take care of ourselves, and we can't do what we've done over the centuries as Black women, and that is to take care of everybody else. And when I say our health, of course I mean our physical health. But I really think we've got to start spending a lot more time thinking about our emotional health. What does it mean to be a Black woman? Raise the same question to be a Black man, to be a Black child. When systemic racism continues to take our lives. And what does it mean when you are victimized because of a double jeopardy, because of systemic racism and systemic sexism? There is no reason that Black women should die more frequently in giving birth to children than white women. There is no reason that Black women should be at the bottom of the pay scale. There is no reason that we are subjected to all of this, creating emotional, psychological stress. And then finally, I have to say that while we are very conscious about the kinds of attacks on our bodies, and when we say that, we see her in front of us. We see Breonna Taylor. We call her name. I also want to say that we have to call it within our community, and it's called domestic violence. We as Black women are subjected to domestic violence at a rate higher than any other woman. So that's it. Top of my list, our health, our maternal health, our physical health, our emotional health.
Well, that's a very good list right there. I think we could spend days talking about that. Glenda, do you have something to add? And what's the top of your list?
Well, you should start with, we all just gonna be like this all night with Dr. Cole, right?
I know. We could all listen to her all night long.
So thank you for your really kind and encouraging words. And thank you for inviting me to this conversation, an important conversation, and commend you for being trailblazers, not only Links Incorporated, but particularly the Eastern region, which, I'm partial about Eastern region because I am a Northeast girl. So thank you for having me. So the 23 million women, Black women in this country are underrepresented and underserved. And I absolutely agree with you, Nicole. This is the most, we say it every election, but for real, y'all.
No technology. Hopefully she'll be back in a second. I was actually she'll be back in 1 second. I was on a Zoom recently with Karen Bass, who is the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, and she talked about the same thing. She says, every year I say this is the year that really matters, and this is the election of our lifetime. And she said, but this really is the year. And she says it does matter every time. And she says that's why people have to continue to go to the polls and stay focused and stay engaged, because every year it does matter. Every year it impacts our communities and each of us. While Glenda's getting that, Dr. Cole, I wanted to talk to you a little bit. I know that you and Glenda were very active in sort of pushing forward a number of things about why it's important for Black women to be represented in this election and represented, for example, at the highest heights of the ticket. Can you talk a little bit about what encouraged you to get involved with that effort? And what it means historically for us to have someone that looks like all of our aunties and our mothers standing there next to the vice president?
Well, my Link sisters, if I tried to say in just a sentence what has been our struggle for 401 years. It is to be seen, to be respected, and indeed to be given because we deserve it, all of our rights.
Mm.
And when you put all of that together, having someone in a position like Senator Harris is in is to say, she is seen, she is respected, and she is leading the charge for us to have our rights. Now, Nicole, you and I both know from that Spelman experience, we know the power in the phrase, if I see one, I can be one.
Be one.
If I see one, I can be one. Think of the little black girls. Think of the little brown girls. Think of the girls of other colors who are saying, I see her. I can be her. But obviously, when we came together as a group of Black women from all over the country and from different industries and conditions, we came together with one solid goal. And that is, first of all, to continue the kind of work that Glenda does and does so effectively. And so we are committed not just to having someone at the top of that ticket, but we need to see Black women all the way up and down every state's road. Why? Because when Black women lead, this is an African proverb, when Black women lead, streams go uphill. Now, you know, that's not the way streams usually go. But Black women, historically and historically, are exceptional leaders. And maybe there's an irony there, Nicole. Maybe there's the irony of, because we have double jeopardy, we see through more than one lens. Because we are traditionally the caregivers, we care passionately, yes, about justice.
So I'm going to ask you something also about young women and young Black women, because I think there is the see her, be her piece of this. But I know that when they're looking at recent polling, somehow young people are still not quite sure why they're voting. And I think, you know, given your perspective, and especially since you talked to so many young women when you were both at Spelman and at Bennett, and all the people that you interacted with, even at the museum, and what you're doing now, can you talk a little bit about the best ways that we can engage Black women or young Black women, and what do you think they really need to know in 2020?
Well, first of all, if I may, let me just say that when I had the nerve to put myself up for the presidency and chairship of the board of the National Council of Negro Women, I did so calling for two things. One, that we would continue in that tradition of Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune and the iconic Dr. Dorothy Irene Height. Wherever social justice is on the agenda, I said, we've got to have a seat at that table. But secondly, I called for the National Council of Negro Women to become more intergenerational. You cannot have a future for NCNW if it's only women of my age. And I'm in that oldest age bracket.
None of us believe that. None of us believe that.
I'll bring the birth certificate. So intergenerational cooperation is something that I know, and certainly in the Links Incorporated, we know the power of working with young girls, with mentoring young women and making sure that our organization is constantly becoming more intergenerational. But to your question, it is more than a notion to convince some of our young'uns, and I use that term respectfully and affectionately, that their vote matters.
Yeah.
In NCNW tomorrow night, we launch a program called Adulting 101. Now, when you're my age, you have to constantly be around young folk so that you can remain woke, okay? So I had to get woke enough to understand what adulting is. And understand that, that's what you all say when you're going to try to act like adults or when you're saying, I should be more responsible. So we are launching tomorrow night, virtually, of course, at Cheney University and at Wilberforce. And we will do this around the country, we hope. Adulting 101, encouraging our young'uns to understand that connection between voting and what they need. If we can help folk to see that connection, you want to live your life without all of those student loans? You want your neighborhood to be safer? You want, in fact, to go through all of this education, get a job, and be paid as much as white folk get paid?
Or what you're actually worth beyond what white people are paid. That's what I like.
Then vote.
Yeah.
Make that connection between what you need and what voting can bring you.
Yeah. Evelyn, did you have a question?
Well, so Dr. Cole, I wanted to ask you, I know we're a nonpartisan organization and we're not telling anybody how to vote. We're just telling them to vote. But tell me this one, as a president of two, HBCUs, and I know all the Spelmanites and Bennetts are out there screaming and yelling right now, and I get it. Unfortunately, I didn't graduate from Spelman or Bennett, but being an accomplished, esteemed president of two of those HBCUs, and when Senator Harris when it came out that she was going to be the next the candidate of Biden's choice, you heard a lot of stuff, a lot of noise. Is she really Black? And what is she going to do? And what's her agenda? What do you say to people when they say that kind of stuff about her and graduating from Howard University and how she forgot where she's come from? And what do you say to people?
I remember way back in the day when there was a question, who is a Jew? And the answer that was put out there was a Jew is someone who claims that he or she is and is so viewed by others. I've thought about that a lot. As this woman of both Jamaican and Indian heritage is now, I get chill bumps. Oh, I'm so glad you're back, Sister Glenda. Is now the number 2 on a ticket.
Yes.
So why don't we ask her? She says she is a Black woman. And I am really impressed that she says it without denying her Indian roots, her mama. And then what do we say? Well, we say, sure acts like one.
Right. I was going to say, the minute she stepped off that plane with those Chucks on and today with those Timberlands on, I think all of us have some idea of who that is.
Oh, I'm so glad, Glenda. Oh, welcome back. Please.
Yes.
Escalenda, we're so glad to have you back. We had started a little bit of a conversation about how to engage young women, but I want to go back and let you talk about what you think are some of the most urgent issues for Black women today and what your data has found.
I've been listening on my iPad for a little bit, so I'm gonna touch upon a couple of it. But Links Incorporated shut my computer down. We do not have time. We're 48 days are from the election. I'm like,
That's right.
so again, as I mentioned, so apologize for it wasn't even my internet. The computer crashed, but luckily we have multiple computers here. It's the most important election cycle for Black women, and we are demanding our return on our voting investment. And that's in the form of policies that directly impact Black women, our families, and our communities. And we're certainly claiming seats at decision-making tables. And so I wholeheartedly agree with Dr. Cole about centering our health. In a pandemic where it is imperative that we wear masks, as you know, Black women oftentimes put our masks on literally last. But I believe I've been thinking through and listening to the women of Higher Heights in some of our surveys, and we're about to go out in the field for some more research, that we are issue voters, and it's intersectional. At the end of the day, Black women want economically thriving, educated, healthy, and safe communities for all Black women. And that is about building a comprehensive plan that centers Black women. And certainly when we have Black women sitting at decision-making tables, we bring not only our qualifications, but our lived experiences as Black women. And so Nicole mentioned that we have a record number of Black women serving in Congress as an example. And so we celebrate that we sent 5 Black women to Congress in 2018, 50 years after Shirley Chisholm was elected to be the first Black woman in that body. And so we, of course, celebrate that there are Black women sitting at that decision-making table. But we also in 2018 sent a nurse, a teacher, a city council member, a state legislator who's a Somalian refugee, and a mother of a slain Black boy. And how uniquely qualified are they in this moment when we're living through a global pandemic, that we have a nurse and a public health professional? That when we are grappling with how we're going to educate every child in America with remote learning and distance learning, that we have a teacher, but not only a teacher, the 2016 Teacher of the Year. And then when our city, our local and state governments are grappling with how do we even survive this moment, but thrive past this moment, that you have 2 women that have been legislators on a city level and on a state level. And finally, as this country comes to a racial awakening around police violence against Black women and men, that we have a mother of a slain Black boy who was killed by gun violence that was racially motivated. And so that's how Black women lead. And I came at the very end listening to the conversation about the historic nature of Kamala Harris's nomination. And so 48 years ago, Shirley Chisholm in July stepped on the Democratic National Convention stage and made history by having her name entered into nomination. And so to me, that's a full circle moment. We are daughters and granddaughters of the legacy of Shirley Chisholm. And Kamala Harris is a part of the completion of that circle. And I say that we're proud daughters of Shirley Chisholm's legacy because she also was a bold and fearless leader who was a Black woman with a variety of identities, including being a daughter of immigrants like Kamala Harris. And so I think, the history-making moment that Senator Harris did when she stepped boldly on that stage, and not only brought the names and the history of Black women from a suffragist to now and naming them, she also brought her varied identities from being a proud Black woman with Indian heritage from her mom, but also boldly brought our organizations to that podium, and the historically Black colleges that have made generations of leaders that have led this country. So I think it is a powerful, she stepped into history, and just as she's a daughter of Shirley Chisholm, she will be the person that creates the legacy to fuel our unborn daughters and granddaughters in the future.
So Glenda, do you have some comments about young women, like, or data that would be helpful as we're going out in the community and talking with young women about the importance of voting?
Yeah, I mean, think what's great about Black women across generations for voting, we all vote differently. And so I proudly always say that, I'm a Black woman who votes because my great grandmother, born in 1895, died shy of her 100th birthday, dreamt a dream bigger for me and my brothers than I can. And that's a woman that for most of her life didn't have a right to vote. That's what motivates me. And so what we will find in this election cycle that we're going to have intergenerational conversations about what is driving us to the polls. And each generation of Black women have a different perspective. But I think we are going to be unified in the importance of the election. And so what we found with particularly Gen Zs and millennial Black women, with a poll we commissioned with Cornell Boucher at Brilliant Corners, was that it was a question around, is the country ready for a woman of color, and particularly a Black woman, to be a vice president nominee? That overwhelmingly Gen Zs and millennial Black women and women in that generation, particularly, were looking for three things. They were looking for the next generation of leaders. They were looking to make history, and they were looking for someone that could unify the country. And so the work I think we have is, as you know, when Black women are fired up across generations, we don't go to the polls alone. And so what we will see for the next 48 days is for us having really compelling conversations that is intergenerational. We're about to do some additional research to hear, I'm calling it a check-in, a pulse check in this moment, because I think we will all agree that we are, we have our days and some days we struggle. That although we're very clear about the issues that center us, we are living in unprecedented times. And so I think using this moment to find out what's motivating Black women voters of all ages and social economic backgrounds and geographical locations actually will allow all of our organizations to build a program beyond Election Day. Because at the end of the day, democracy doesn't begin and end on November 3rd. In fact, it begins in the work to ensure that the leaders that are vying for our votes that are elected are actually centering the issues of voters that have created the environment for them to win.
Right. Well, we're almost at a point where we want to take some questions that have been posed in the chat. But the one question I have for you before we do that is this. We've been talking a lot about what motivates Black women. But in this year, in particular, there's been a lot of people coming to many of us asking us, how do we help? This notion of allyship with our white women sisters. They abandoned, in some respects, they sort of took a different road in 2016. And then we saw all of them out with their pink hats, protesting. And, I think a lot of us are wondering, and when they come to us and ask, how can we help? How do we talk to them? Can we trust them? What do you all think about that? Because they are coming and they're trying to talk to us, and we're very hopeful that they will have sort of understood like that their issues too are our issues, and we need them to be our allies, and they should be our allies. So I'm interested in what both of you have to say about the sort of that particular allyship. I know it's hard. It's hard. It's hard.
No.
It's hard.
You want to start, Glenda?
I'll start because I know you're going to shut it down. I would say one, just like we're having conversations between Black women and our sisters about the importance, I've always encouraged our white women allies in particular, that they should go ahead and go get their girls and their cousins and their sisters to have frank conversations on their own. That is not our responsibility to help organize and mobilize them to the polls. We're going to take care of our sisters and aunts and moms. So spend some time having frank conversations. And frankly, in this moment, as you're aware, there is a lot of energy around Black women. Sometimes for an organization, it can be overwhelming, particularly from our allies, because they are they're thanking Black women. We say welcome again. Go organize your communities. But at the end of the day, we are still, the 23 million Black women in this country are underrepresented. And so we have an opportunity to continue to elect more Black women from the local elections to the top of the ticket. So, our response is invest in Black women. And, like our good friend over at Planned Parenthood, Alexis McGill Johnson, and also continue to trust us, because at the end of the day, what we've known all of the long, that we are bold leaders in what now the broader America, and frankly, the globe has recognized during a global pandemic, is that we are the right leaders for this moment. That is why the 7 Black women mayors have been boldly leading during COVID-19 and the attack on Blackness and the uprising since George Floyd election. It is why that the congressional members from Maxine Waters to Ayanna Pressley have been early saying that there was a racial disparity in COVID-19. We know that these women were prepared and have been leading, but it's now that our allies are seeing it. So therefore, if you're going to see it, then the women deciding to run for office shouldn't be underfunded and under talked about and under resourced from volunteers' perspective. That we need to be recruiting, training, and supporting Black women to run for office. Because not only do we sit at the decision-making table and uniquely bring and center Black women, our families, and our communities, but we actually do that in a way that is beneficiary to the entire country.
Thank you. And Dr. Cole, I know you probably got something on your heart to say about this, and I want to hear it.
I wanted Sister President to go first, because
I want to hear it.
I'm a wise woman. And therefore, I will simply say to all that Glenda has just said, I am going to say amen and a women too.
Perfect. Thank you. So I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Link Evelyn, for some of the questions that she's received in our chat.
Great. Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. So one of the questions that was asked is third-party voting something to be addressed? Is third-party voting?
Is the question about sort of like the Kanye, whether or not they're spoilers, or the way Jill Stein was on the way that Jill Stein was on the ballot last time?
Right, distractors. Put some. Should we be worried about that? What do you think, Dr. Cole?
Well, in the spirit of nonpartisanship that we all must speak out of, I would have to begin by saying, in a democracy which does not really function fully, but claims to be, you have to respect someone coming forward outside of the 2 major parties. But what I also have to say, and I am not being partisan, is there is so much at stake in this election, we don't need any kind of distractions.
Mm-hmm.
If there is a serious candidate addressing the needs of Black and other oppressed people in the United States of America, doing that sincerely and effectively, then we have to applaud. But if there is anyone who dares to take our lives to be a show, then there's no time for that.
Right. Glenda, you ditto, or you want to add something to that?
No, that's definitely a clap.
Right.
I'll add one thing to that, which is, I was talking with some folks about the numbers, just analyzing the 2016 election, and the election was decided in 4 states with less than 100,000 votes. So, I mean, to the extent that we can continue to talk to people about not only registering, but why it's important, every single vote matters. In some of those states, the number of votes were less than 10,000 votes. Literally, that could be 2,000 in this precinct, 2,000 in this precinct. So again, we don't have, to Dr. Cole's point, we can't afford to either sit out. You can't afford to quote unquote throw away your vote because you think things are not perfect on either side of the ticket. It all matters. So
It all matters.
And I would also say when you look at those numbers, Nicole, it is also shows that if we actually continue to do the work of organizing our networks to the polls, we actually, even though we did our work, that extra work that we could have done could have been the margins of win in some of those places, including helping to elect Black women and others down ballot.
Which is actually what happened. I think people learned a lesson in 2016, and in 2017 you saw more people of color and more diverse candidates up and down the ballots. You saw in 2018 a number of state legislatures flip and become more diverse. And you saw, as Glenda mentioned, some of these mayors and to Dr. Cole's point, young leaders, next gen. I mean, there's so many mayors now, and again, I'm dating myself, but I can't believe how many of them are younger than me. And I'm just so excited about that there are all these young people, mayors of major cities, and that those votes made the difference.
Absolutely. So we have another question. So we all heard the statement, voting is your civic duty. We know that, we say that. This is a pretty common sentiment, especially each November when election day approaches. But what does that really mean to young people? What would you say to them? That is your civic duty.
Well, I had a chance to really talk about that a little earlier, so I would love to give the floor to Glenda on that. How do we inspire, inform, motivate our young people?
This is probably not the right language, but it's the right analysis. And so we could talk about language, is that oftentimes people don't realize that everything that we touch, everything we do is tied to a public policy, right? And so for answering the question, well, I don't do politics, right? Why vote? My vote doesn't matter. That I use this, most of us have a street light, right? In most communities, recognizing in some of our rural areas and in many of our indigenous communities, you may not have that. But that light that might be out on your street is tied to a public dollars, tied to a public policy because of like planning. And ultimately that means it's tied to an elected official that we decided to vote or not vote. And so if we want to build these communities that we can thrive in, that we need to determine how we connect that. So I think it's having a conversation around like your iPad, like literally everything has some type of public policy or public dollar attached to it, including our phones and, as you know, Facebook, like all of our social media platforms. So I do think that watching the media recently coverage around how things are regulated or how we're approaching things around our safety and disinformation on our social media handles have our young people looking like if we want to defund and reimagining how we police in this country, it is ability to talk about our elected leaders and how do we create policies. And so I think we oftentimes don't talk about what's tied to policies, and we do live in a political system and how those policies are tied to politics. And in that, at the end of the day, the squeaky wheel gets the oil. I spent 6 years working for the New York State Legislature as a chief of staff. And sometimes people believe that squeaky wheel has to be that squeaky wheel is well funded. And so money does play a major role in our political system. But frankly, voices, so now the word Trump, voices trump dollars. And I know that the elected leaders that I worked for in the New York State Senate wanted to hear from our elected leaders. It's making, going for lobby visits, making phone calls, now tweeting at our elected officials, and that we actually all have a role to play to shape the policies that direct our day-to-day lives. And so it's just a different approach around having conversations of why vote, why politics, why policy.
Glenda, you mentioned something.
just say and link, Nicole, we can make the exact same compelling argument that Glenda has just made around the census.
I was getting ready to ask you about that. I literally,
You know, Spelman women tend to be on the. I mean, it's not about, you know, that I don't see why I have to be counted. It's that if you are not counted, my sister and my brother, you don't get what counts.
Right.
And
Right.
that's both political power and that is material resources. That street light, that road, that school that you say you care about, it is tied to the census and it is tied to voting.
Yes, absolutely.
100%.
Yes. How do we actually hold, and I think you touched on this, Glenda, how do we hold our elected officials accountable once they get in office?
I do twofold. We want to create the environment for our champions to be bold legislators, right? So they need to hear from us and receive mail, phones, tweets in attendance, because that gives them the power when they sit at conference tables in their legislative bodies, which is what our white counterparts do. I remember, the state senator I worked for, it's like, we're fighting, or the Black Caucus we're fighting for this education bill, and we're fighting for the will of the people because we know that is indeed the case. But their colleagues from wealthier districts would actually come with stacks of letters to say, these are the letters from our communities. And so for me, it is about being in dialogue to create the environment for our champions and absolutely hold our elected officials accountable, including the ones that look like us, right? And that is, again, making phone calls, visiting, attending town halls. It is about your civic activity beyond the voting booth that actually will push our elected officials to ensure that they're centering the issues that the voters that frankly helped to elect them, hold them accountable for that vote.
Okay. You said one more question, Nicole. We have time for one more.
Well, yeah, if we have one more question, and then we're going to talk a little bit, we're going to see if we can play the video that we tried to play before, and then we just want to make sure that everyone knows how that they can access all the resources they need to really get in this fight.
Okay. So I'm gonna push the envelope a little bit with this question. The president announced today that during his press conference that it was his idea to conduct COVID-19 testing on HBCU campuses. At the same time, his advisor also announced that the first vaccines available should be given to health workers on the front lines and African Americans because of pre-existing health conditions. What is your opinion about giving the first available vaccine to HBCU students and the Black community?
If I could believe it, I would be jumping for joy. I mean, there is something that is just fundamental here. It says that those who have been the most affected need to receive the first attention. It's such overwhelming evidence that we as Black people, along with brown sisters and brothers, along with indigenous communities, are suffering 2 times, 3 times what white folks are suffering. If I could believe it, I'd be happy.
All right, Glenda, you got a response for that, Madam President?
Excuse me.
All right, well, let's do this. Let's wrap up, and then right after I'm done, we're going to try and show the video again. But at this point, we would like to say this has been an amazing conversation. I think we could sit here and talk with the two of you about these issues for hours and hours and hours. But I think what you did was a really good job of making all of us think about sort of holistically how Black women fit into the election this year, how everything that impacts us, our ability to care for our loved ones in our communities, is impacted and on the ballot. And I think as Links, we're all engaged on behalf of the Eastern area. We've been trying to make sure that Links have the resources that they need, the knowledge that they need, and the facts and the data to go out and really take our communities and make sure that they're represented at the table. In the Eastern area, we created some toolkits that are available on our website. Hopefully, many of you have been following us on Instagram. We've provided a number of sort of social media flags and posts so that you can take them and use them personally or in your chapters. We've talked about the importance of voting. We've talked about the importance in giving out dates for voter registration. We've talked about the census, how important it is to fill that out. And I know Black Voter Day is coming up. I think it's Friday. So we're going to be doing some things around that. And if you are chapter presidents or you are your LNPA co-chairs, we encourage you to do something on Friday because it is Black Voter Participation Day. And that's a day where everybody needs to reach out. And finally, I'd like to mention the big resource that the Links have been using this year, both as a partner to the Eastern area of the Links and a partner to National Links, is When We All Vote. This is a nonpartisan organization that was started by our forever FLOTUS, Michelle Obama, and actually her number 2 person is one of our Link sisters, like Stephanie Young, and they have been doing an amazing job in trying to organize voters and get issues out there. But for each of us Links, we've had several trainings. So please go to the website When We All Vote. You can see how you can register people. You can get yourself registered, and you can download the app so that while you're sitting on your couch, if you're wondering what to do this weekend, you can be registering people to vote. You can be going through your networks and making sure everyone knows where to vote, how to vote safely, how to make a plan. All of that is available to you on that one app and that website. So When We All Vote is again the website, and that's where a lot of the resource that the Links have been doing in this pandemic to make sure that people know about voting, know their voting rights. And finally, I would say as Links, we're all looking for the other things that we're going to be doing up until the election. I know that a number of Link chapters, the DMV chapters, are planning a legislative day that's coming up. I know a lot of chapters are doing donations of PPE to poll workers. I know that people are encouraging people, Links, to be poll workers because there's an upcoming shortage in that regard. And I know a number of Links who are also lawyers are getting trained on how they can do election protection work. That's the other important piece of this, because once we get all those people in the polls, it's really important that their votes count and are counted. So if you're a lawyer and you're a Link, there are resources that will allow you to be able to figure out how you can engage and help people to protect their votes. So those are all the things that we're working on right now, and we encourage you to work on, that you can do virtually during this pandemic, because none of us can afford to sit on our hands. I mean, quite frankly, the minimum that we can do is register and vote, but all of us have resource. We have agency, and now we have urgency, thanks to all the things that we heard today from Dr. Cole and our sister president, Glenda, at Higher Heights. And I do encourage both of you, everyone, to go and check out both of their websites to see what they're doing. In fact, I'm really interested, Dr. Cole, in the adulting series that you're about to put on. And Glenda, we will be following you to see how the data collection comes along and looking for all of the things that you've been doing to really help support Black female candidates and inspire Black females to run and engage in the political process. So on behalf of the Eastern area, I'd like to say thank you all both very much. Link Shawana, do you have anything else to say before we try and do the video and wrap up?
I just want to say thank you to our panelists that have joined us this evening. You all have given us many things to think about and many next steps and action items, some things we were already working on. And I really love the discussion on the intergenerational piece and how to work with and respond to our younger sisters that are out there. I think that is so very, very critical. So thank you for joining us, imparting your insights and your wisdom, and hopefully we can get this video working.
Yes.
And thanks to everyone that joined us this evening.
Yes, thank you, Madam Area Director. And before we go to the video, I do want to just recognize our Eastern Area Program Chair, link Rhonda Crowder for her hard work, and of course, link Aurelia Williams, who did all of our IT. Thank you so much, link Aurelia. And of course, on behalf of both Nicole and I, thank you, Madam Eastern Area Director, for always supporting what Legislative and Public Affairs Committee is doing. And here's our video. And stay safe.
And thank our committee as well. We had a number of committee members that really helped us with this as well. So I want to thank all of our committee members.
Yes, thank you. We're ready? All right.
Well, children, where there is so much racket, there must be something out of kilter.
Sojourner Truth was a truth teller. She spoke truth, knowing that it might make people uncomfortable, but that these truths must be spoken.
When I think about what it means to say, ain't I a woman, it is commanding the respect we deserve.
She was challenging them to see her not simply as another woman, but as a Black woman, to acknowledge her Blackness, because it was just as important as her womanhood.
In today's political climate, there has not been full recognition of the contributions of Black women to the building of our democracy.
Our voices are not being included in a real way in the mainstream media movement that has happened. Even the Women's March, it's like, keeping it real, sisters ain't coming out here in pussy hats, okay? Like, we're just not doing it.
Transgender women of color, I think, have a really close relationship with the broader feminist movements, because it's really about who has agency and control over one's own body.
Black women are still carrying women's rights, human rights, equal rights. Really, just as my grandmother used to say, the more things change, the more they stay the same.
Her response to really patriarchy, her response to sexism, and her response to white racism really allows for this movement, Black feminists, to have a foundation that brings us to have the hardest and most courageous conversations.
It's time out for you ignoring us. It's time out for invisibility. It no longer works for us. It didn't work for us then, and it certainly doesn't work for us now.
And those words she spoke were the words of representing all of the women who could not be in that room, but whose voices needed to be heard in that room.
If the first woman God ever made was able to turn the world upside down all alone, these women together ought to be able to turn it back and get it right side up again.
Ain't I a woman? Ain't I a woman?
Ain't I a woman?
Ain't I a woman?
Ain't I a woman? Ain't I a woman?
Thank you, Link Sisters. Everyone stay safe.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.